Hi, everybody. It's Jeff Hopper, and we are taking a break from our regular series that is currently going on, and we're stepping aside because it's Easter week, and I have Jeffrey Cranford back with us again. There he is, from sunny La Quinta, California. It's
And it is
always
sunny.
sunny in
It
La
is
Quinta,
nice today.
California. Sometimes it's a little too sunny there, but Jeff and I were together 3 weeks ago with you and talked about preparing for Easter. And now we come to you on Good Friday. Some of you won't see this until the week after Easter. And I want to talk to Jeff a little bit about whether we leave Easter behind or what do we do with it. So let's start with something again with regard to the mental game, which we did a few weeks ago. Jeff, after a round, sometimes you'll hear people talk about, well, I'm just going to leave that round behind me. And we talk we when we look at good players now, they talk about their process, so they kind of do things exactly the same way every time.
Right.
Do they completely forget rounds, or are there parts they remember? What should I remember? What should I forget?
Well, I'm going to take exactly the position I took with us 3 weeks ago, or the last time we did this. And now I'm going to hedge again because it's yes and no. It depends on the round. I mean, if I've got a round that was not anywhere close, maybe I was feeling well, it was a bad day, I got a bad start, something, I have got to leave that in the past. Of course, I think of Paul, he says, forget what lies behind. I take that whole admonition about and a bad round feels like sin. A lot of
Yeah,
times, it
yeah.
just feels like I've failed, and I will try to just push that out of my mind. It reminds me, when I was in college playing college golf, and we were up in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, and Jack Nicklaus. They were talking about Bobby Clampett was talking about Jack Nicklaus or something, and that he was doing a clinic. And he said, I've never shanked. Somebody asked him, well, what do you do when you shank it? Jack Nicklaus said, well, I've never shanked a ball in my life. And somebody in the audience said, well, wait a minute. Back in 1978 or something, I saw you shank a ball. And Nicholas turned to him and said, I've never shanked a ball in my life. So conveniently, he was able to forget what had been behind and press on. And so for those bad rounds, but the opposite is also true. I mean, I carry with me certain shots that I pulled off perfectly. I took a few lessons when I used to teach with Bill Harmon, the Harmon brothers, years ago. And he kind of set me up with Butch, this pre-Tiger days. And I went down to Lochinvar in Houston, took lessons from Butch Harmon for about a week. And it didn't help that much, but he's not because he's not a great teacher. I wasn't a great student. But he says, what was Fred Couples' kind of mental? How did he think? Because he'd worked with Fred and Greg Norman, these guys, and what was Fred Couples' kind of whole mental thing? And he said every time he said he never went to a sports psychologist, but he'd get over a shot. And he said, well, Fred, what do you think? He goes, well, I think about the time that I hit the very best shot with an 8-iron that I needed to cut into a back right pin. I think of that shot and then I swing. So he's remembering those shots, those rounds, those things. So that's what you have to do. You have to cling to those, get mental pictures of great rounds, great shots, great holes you played, and then carry those forward and then forget all this other stuff. Because clearly Jack Nicklaus has never shanked a ball in his life.
Well, then what do we do with something as monumental as Easter and that time frame? Do we just forget Good Friday because everything was awful, and remember Easter morning because everything is wonderful? Or when you step away from Easter and you move into the rest of the year, I know that you don't just put it behind you. What are you clinging to that really helps you throughout the year?
Yeah, that's such a good question, Jeff. Again, I'm going to refer back to the feast because I think of these significant moments in human history revolving around the life of Jesus. I think of it through the feast. I mean, I think of, the Feast of First Fruits, when he was raised. I think of Pesach, or when he, was crucified, which we'd call Good Friday. And then what do I carry forward? Well, then I'm immediately thinking about Pentecost. And I'm thinking about his return through the feast. And so all of this to me is a composite picture of what some theologians call the wounded victor. Okay, so through Easter, there's a wounding. Many they didn't know what to see. The prophets were kind of looking into the future, and they saw the suffering servant of Isaiah 52 and 53. And then they saw this clearly, this messianic figure, this dominion, this Son of Man, Daniel saw, and all all authority and everything would be given to him. It'd be everlasting kingdom. And some thought, well, it's just spiritual language. Others thought maybe this is two different individuals. But what we know is that this was brought together in the life of Jesus.
Mm.
So it's impossible to see and carry on and say, well, I don't want to think about the death of Jesus,
Right.
without seeing the full picture of the wounded victor. Here's God that speaks to us about humility, taking on human flesh, dying a cruel, brutal death, naked on a cross. I mean, this gives us a picture of the very character of God, but not only a defeated one. It's wounded. He's wounded, as we see in Genesis 3. His heel was crushed.
Right.
But then he rises to this level of magnificence. And of course, then we get to the fall feast and we get his return in this triumphant return and the trumpets and what we call Rosh Hashanah.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally Sukkot, or the Feast of Booths, where he comes back and dwells with us.
Right.
And so to me, as I think of the feast, it's a central part. The wounded is part of the victor, and the victor is part of the wounding. So they're inseparable. So in some ways, we think about it really all year. We always take it with us, the dying and then the soon to be the victory of Jesus. I think we'll be thinking about the wounded part of Jesus for all of eternity, as a triumphant, beautiful thing that made heaven possible.
Right. By his stripes, we are healed.
By his stripes, we are healed. And more than just disease, my soul.
Right. Absolutely.
My soul is healed,
right.
Which is beautiful.
Yeah, well, and our sin is washed clean, so we're able to be even there in eternity, remarking again, wow, the stripes.
And last thing I just say, Jeff, real quickly, people struggle with this idea of why did God allow? And it's in knowing poverty that provision seems so much more wonderful. I think in knowing of Christ's death and knowing what he suffered and knowing then what we suffered as a function of the fall, we're going to take us into eternity, and it's just going to be that much more precious to us.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jeffrey.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, and thanks to all of you for being with us. We are always glad to share some space with you, and we'll see you again as our series with Tim Philpott gets rolling again next week.
Great.